So I've got a bunch of questions, well, topics that people wanted us to go over. So I'm going to find things that I can speak about pretty quickly in a back and forth here, just talking to you guys. And we'll see how many we get through. But yeah, so I'll go down the list and give you answers to stuff. Okay, so we have anti-homeless architecture. Okay, so what is anti-homeless architecture? Anti-homeless architecture is a name for benches and for things that are designed to prevent people from kind of being comfortable there for an extended period. So if you've ever seen a public bench with basically rails in between it so that you can't lay down on it, that would be a type of anti-homeless architecture because they don't want the homeless sleeping on the bench, is basically an example. Feedback on it. I'll look at the risk of this. Now, personally, my view on that is that the anti-homeless architecture is solving the wrong problem. I'm personally more focused on the source rather than that. There is an argument for if you don't place any value on the homeless and they're entirely a nuisance in your mind. So if you're a sort of city planner or you're somebody that is just views them as a nuisance without any intrinsic value, then I could see that like you're treating them kind of like a fire. You're putting in a risk control mitigation measure or potentially a prevention measure to try to just like make them not want to be there and move out of the area. Bit dehumanizing to treat people like they're just a simple hazard, but I mean, I get how the framework would work, so you could. Personally, my bigger focus would be on homelessness prevention or getting people housed so that they don't need the bench. Also, some of those benches, the rails are so closely packed together, depending on how big your legs are, you can't even sit there. So, I mean, I think sometimes the anti-homeless architecture goes so far that it's not even comfortable for people who aren't homeless who are trying to use the bench normally. Sometimes the handrails, they're basically armrests. They're often designed that way, and they're so kind of like low where they're awkwardly heighted. Where depending on your build, they're just kind of uncomfortable and in the way. So they make the overall experience of that park just worse overall. I don't know. I haven't seen as many of them in my area, but they do exist, and there are some in like 1 or 2 towns over. So I have seen them. I don't know. I don't find them particularly comfortable. I wrote a book. Well, it's like 80 pages. It's a book because Amazon calls it a book, but it's really a long document on a proposed idea for how you could address homelessness. It was an idea that was, one of the visions you have in the shower type of thing that I did some back and forth on and expanded out. The clickbaity sort of title there, but it does relate to this, was Free Rent Forever, a radical solution to the housing and affordability crisis. I'll probably make a video series on that because it's just kind of fun and you guys can see what an out of there sort of wacky idea looks like. We'll probably do a video series on that because I think you guys will find that fun. In general though, I need to do more research on it because maybe I would agree with it if I had more research. It would depend, but just on face value, seems a bit dehumanizing, and I think the focus is in the wrong place. But I'd have to do research on it because I might end up agreeing with it on further research. I might end up disagreeing with it in general. It just depends. I don't think I know enough about it to agree or disagree, but just on the face, it doesn't look very nice. One more thing on that. People who work in disasters, work in emergency management, work in these sorts of fields, tend to be very compassionate by nature. We tend to be very kind of like, a lot of us like bleeding hearts. We care a lot about people. You go into a field where you're dealing with people who are having a very, very bad day because you tend to be overly empathetic or more empathetic on average, which isn't better or worse. It's just kind of the way that people are. So my bias is predisposed to view people as people and to kind of be a bit, part of it's kind of softer that way, but you tend to kind of want to spend the money and help the people even when it's not the best risk decision. That's kind of your bias. So my initial bias is that, but it might be wrong. So just keeping that in mind, right? Because some people might go, whatever, I don't like the homeless. Fair enough. But it's just our predisposition professionally tends to be more towards extraordinarily compassionate in a way that's not necessarily average. So just acknowledging the bias there. Why the McDonald ice cream broke? That's amazing. Okay, so I'm pretty sure this is referencing why McDonald's ice cream machines are broken or not working. I will be honest here, I don't tend to go to a lot of fast food. I haven't had McDonald's in a very long time. I think I've had it once in my life. I'm not as well informed on this, but why would a particular machine in a fast food restaurant be broken all the time? That's pretty much how I'd read that. Okay. So this is a process thing. McDonald's is a business. A business would leave a particular service or good in disrepair for an extended period of time, usually because they would view it as the correct business decision. And the way that they would think about it this way would be the amount of money they make from selling ice cream, frequently from having it fixed, valued against the cost of maintaining it so it's always available. So what they probably have is a repair schedule that's on a certain cadence. So let's say they repair it once every month. I don't know what they do, but let's just say for the sake of argument they do. Let's say, they repair it and it breaks after a week. Because whatever, 3/4 of the time, assuming, 4 weeks in a month, it's not working. They could potentially quadruple the repairs and repair it once a week instead of once a month, and it would always be operational. But that increased cost might be more than the profit they make from selling the ice cream in that 3-week period. It may be the case that they actually just want to offer the ice cream to attract people to McDonald's and then not serve it. So it might be that they just want to have it on the menu because it looks nice on the menu, and that marketing value is where all their money is in it to get you to buy other stuff, and they don't actually care if they sell ice cream. That's very possible. I'm just kind of spitballing here on why a business would do that. That would make sense. So for whatever reason, they've probably evaluated the frequency of cost of repair against the value of selling the ice cream and determine that whatever frequency of repair they're doing is what they're sticking with. McDonald's is a very large company. They're very smart. They know what they're doing. It is possible that just due to size, this is an inefficiency, that they would be making more money if they had the machines fixed. And they're just kind of suffering from inefficiency under the weight of how big they are. That's possible. I would have to think about it. But my initial assumption would be that whole repair cadence versus the amount of ice cream they sell thing. The margins just probably aren't there. I would assume that's why. I'm not too interested in the political angles on this stuff, to be honest. I don't find it interesting. I'm more interested in the emergency management stuff, and there aren't too many angles there. So for those who don't know, what's a drag queen? A drag queen is a male that dresses up and performs in drag. I just define drag with drag. I'm not good at the definition on this. John, see if you can add a picture or two, just as an example, to kind of explain this, or somewhere that defines them well. It's very flamboyant. It's very festive. It's very kind of like loud colors, and you're having fun. It's expressive. That's the type of idea. Sometimes there are sexual undertones. Sometimes there are not. It just kind of depends. Generally speaking, people think of drag, they're thinking of very sexualized things, but it just kind of depends. Okay. So what is Drag Queen Reading Hour? From my understanding, the start of Drag Queen Reading Hour, it was an education program that was put in place because they wanted kids to read. And drag queens essentially were basically clowns. So, same way that you would attract a clown to entertain children because it's different, it's new, it's something that's interesting. It's like, hey, let's go read this interesting novel with the clown. Let's go read this interesting novel with the pirate. Let's go read this interesting novel with this pop star. Let's go read this interesting novel with the drag queen. You're bringing in an entertainer to kind of spice up this idea. Now, my understanding of this was the first one when this was piloted. I believe it was a high school, but it may have been a grade school teacher, but basically a teacher who happened to also do drag, basically made this program to attract kids back to the library, to make kids want to read more. And initially, from my understanding, it had great success. Reading rates actually improved. The point was to get kids interested in reading, and it did that. I've worked with many students. I've worked with students in a university environment, an adult education environment. I've taught not high school curriculum, but when I did, I've done first aid stuff and some professor stuff. I've gone into high schools and taught high school kids certain things too. So I've generally teach adults, but especially in the university lecturer side, I've seen a lot of kids come out of high school and still like kind of early 20s, like 19 to 21, maybe a bit older. With the masters, they're quite a bit older, but in that sort of age range. And I've seen what their performance kind of reading rate over time, and I have some exposure to this. I think kids need to read more. I think reading comprehension and critical thinking skills needs some help in general. And I could do a longer thing on this, but with the way it was originally designed, I don't see much harm really in the Drag Queen Reading Hour because it got kids reading. It wasn't very sexual. And, once again, it got kids reading. It really basically was, let's read with the clown. And when I say clown, I've said it a few times, I'm not meaning this in a derogatory way. If you want someone to entertain kids at a kid's party, clowns are good at their job. They're a serious entertainment profession. Like, they know what they're doing. And, this is putting on an outfit, putting on dress to entertain and make things more lively. So I liked that initially. Now, my understanding was that this also got kind of, when it grew, as many things do when they grow, some people keep to the original intention, some people kind of ruin it for everybody. So there were probably, I would assume, a few examples of people making this overly sexual and then introducing what most of us in North America would consider inappropriate content for kids that are a bit too young. So the drag wasn't, lavish and just expressive. It was sexual, and then it was with kids that were not old enough, and these were not teachers. So, that sort of thing. And my understanding was that this was not the majority, but that a few of those apparently occurred. And then this gets political, right? So fair enough. In general, though, I like getting kids to read. Maybe there's something there with the way it's regulated. Maybe you have it be something that school boards control where it's only specific teachers. Maybe there's like an opt-in parental sign-off. I don't know. But that's my understanding of the situation, and I want kids to read more. So that was my thinking on that. Other than that, I'd have to get political, and I don't really have a horse in that race personally. It's not that I'm uncomfortable doing political stuff. It's that I don't want to just provide a personal opinion without any other sort of value added to it. It doesn't serve anyone, I find, for what I'm trying to do. So if I'm going to get political about something, it'd be informing on the issue so that people can make up their own mind, not just kind of throwing my thoughts on something out there. And some of these are just way too political, and I don't know enough about the subject. Arguing a negative is interesting. Okay. So arguing a negative. This is one thing that's related to critical thinking that is pretty interesting. When someone makes a claim, so I say the sky is blue, the onus is on me making the claim to justify or prove that claim, generally speaking. So when someone says, hey, X is Y, usually that person has to support that. And then once they have sufficiently supporting that with, reasonable evidence, then if someone disagrees, the onus will then probably flip on that person to, prove them wrong or to provide counter evidence or something to that effect. One common phenomena I see, I've seen this a lot online, I've seen this a lot with kids learning to critically think, with people in arguments that are in bad faith. You see it, it's just a thing that happens, is trying to force people to prove a negative without evidence being provided. So someone will make a claim like the moon is cheese, and then they'll say, prove me wrong. But they won't provide evidence that the moon is cheese. They'll just say, prove me wrong. And the issue with that, of which there are several, is the number one is that they haven't provided evidence for their claim. And number two, they're putting the onus on someone who might not be prepared to know anything about their claim, to not just prove that what they've said is untrue, because they have to then build up everything around the evidence of their claim, because their claim has no evidence. They then have to prove every reason why it's not true. So here's an earth is flat example. So someone makes the claim that the earth is flat, and then they say, prove me wrong. Right? And now generally flat earthers won't do this. They will have their version of evidence for things, but let's just say someone does that. And you say, well, but I have a picture here, and it's of the globe, and it's not flat, it's round. And they go, well, that's on a piece of paper, and paper is flat, so the earth is flat. What's your next one? And you go, okay, that's not how that works, but sure. Well, here's a 3D model of the earth and how it is, a model, and it's round. In fact, it's spherical. And they go, that's on a screen. That's a conspiracy. That's actually flat. When you show me Google Images, that's a flat screen. See, it's flat. And you go, but no, but okay. Okay, but we have NASA and we've been there. And they go, well, NASA's a conspiracy. I don't acknowledge anything NASA says. And you go, okay. They haven't provided any evidence for their initial claim, and they haven't provided any evidence to counteract your refutations. They just keep asking you, basically, to prove their claims. This is kind of like an endless loop of proving a negative, and it can be very, very frustrating. People will have this sort of argument in relationships. People will have this sort of argument with things that they believe very strongly, where no evidence is being provided whatsoever. Now, I made a fairly flippant article about this during the COVID pandemic, where I used a flat earth example, and then I extrapolated on proving negative a bit. And then I said to someone something to the effect of, if you ask me to prove a negative on something, I'm going to ask you to prove that you are not a chair. And when you can't do that, I'm going to conclude that you are a chair, and I will have to ask myself why I'm wasting my time talking to a chair. Why am I talking to a chair? That's a bit flippant, but the idea is if someone is proposing an idea or they're making a claim and there's no evidence for the claim, it can just be discounted out of hand because there's no evidence. There's nothing to work with. There's another kind of thing that comes off of this called extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If someone makes a claim that is really out there, so they make a claim that something is very, very certain and that it is this way, but it is something that is completely out of the norm, pigs fly, or, they make some sort of thing that's way out there. And then they don't provide very, very significant evidence. You can also say, you know what, that's not enough. You're going to tell me that gravity doesn't exist. I'm going to need more than trust me, bro. Right? So, stuff like that, because gravity at this time has been an established theorem that we agree upon. So if you're going to go against that, you could, but you have to, provide a lot of evidence for that because there's been a lot of evidence that's gone into gravity. So anyways, that sort of thing. Yeah, proving the negative, ask people to prove a negative is generally a bad idea. And you can find it in arguments all the time. So pay attention to when people make a claim about something and what they use as evidence for their claim. If the evidence is, well, because this, and it directly ties in, sure, then maybe there's something to chew on. What you might hear is they make a claim and then they answer that claim with another claim, and it's basically just succeeding claims, but there's no proof anywhere. That's just a waste of time. You'll hear that very often with conspiracy theorists, in my experience. And it's interesting, but there's nothing to work with. So it's basically just a waste of air. Now, this isn't to say that everything that you ever say has to be an evidence-based, proof-based conversation. A book I wrote, short document basically I wrote on radical solutions to the housing and affordability crisis. I don't make the claim that the stuff works. I say, okay, here's an unhinged idea I had in the shower. I fully acknowledge it's radical, and it's just here, and take for it what you want, and if you want to run with it, run with it, and it might work, it might not. I have no idea. This is a random idea I had. If you say to somebody, look, this is just some idea I have no idea that if it works, you're not making a claim that something is true. You're saying, this is a random idea I had, and they can work with that and say, well, that's nice that you had a random idea, and they can just dismiss it because it can be dismissed. They could conversely go, let's have some fun with that. But now you're not trying to change somebody's worldview. You're not trying to say, you're wrong, I'm right. You're saying, I had this neat idea. What do you think? Right? Completely different conversation. It's exploratory. If you have, an idea that you think it might be true and you're not sure, then, don't say it's true. Just say, I have this idea. What do you think about it? What are there to argue about? That's fun. So, proving a negative. The other ones I'll do in a different format. The other ones are too long. Have fun.